Hi, it's Penny here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the worst books that I read in 2023. Now, this was going to be like a top 10 worst books, but then I realized if I count all my 1 and 2 stars, there's only 12, which isn't too bad, and I may as well just include them all. As well, I just filmed my best graphic novels of 2023 video, so this video is going to require an attitude adjustment, but let's do it. So firstly, this is actually probably the most disappointing on this list, and that is The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. So The Fragile Threads of Power is a new spin-off series in the same world as the Darker Shade of Magic series, which is a series I really liked. Now, admittedly, I did, before reading The Fragile Threads of Power, do a reread, and while I still really loved the first book, the second and third ones I thought had a few problems, but The Fragile Threads of Power was even worse. It really wasn't what I was expecting, because from all the marketing I had heard it was about these new characters, and I thought that the main characters from the original series were just going to be like maybe there but as the background. But instead, at least half the book was focused on the original characters and the backstory of what happened between the original series and the 7 years up until this new series. And I personally felt like all of those backstories were very unnecessary. I will admit I'm a more plot focused reader. I think maybe if you're a character focused reader you might like it, but I still don't think it did a good job of that. I just felt like so many of the lines were very superficial without actually having any meaning. Maybe if you like the vibe of it you won't mind, but the vibe just wasn't for me. As well, like, this world has some really cool magical elements to it, and this book did introduce some new cool things, but because it spent so much time on these unnecessary backstories, what little magical stuff we did get felt very rushed over. Kind of the whole point of this series is that there are these multiple Londons that you can travel between, and each one has kind of varying degrees of magic. And in the first series there was a lot of traveling between the different Londons, but in this new series, while there is kind of an element, such a small piece of it, and then kind of the new magical pieces that were introduced, not much was done with that either. Honestly, this was 550 pages, I think. And I think it could have been cut down to like under 300 pages and had a much bigger impact. I really think this is one of these ones where the author has just become so successful that their work is no longer really being edited the way that it should be. So I think this could have been a lot better if it had had a bit more time spent on it. Then at number 11 we have both Northern Lights and The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman. Actually, I think Northern Lights is called The Golden Compass in the Northern Hemisphere. I don't know. So I think The Golden Compass, Northern Lights movie, is one that a lot of people loved when they were younger, and I can also see why a lot of people who maybe read this series when they were younger, maybe a lot of the concepts were newer to them, I can see why maybe they'd like them, maybe. And I will admit there were some really interesting concepts in this book series, but the way the plot was stuck together was so weird, and also I found Lyra to be so annoying and unlikable, especially when we learn how old she is, because I really had assumed from the way that she's written that she was very, very young, because that was really the only way I could excuse what a little shit she was. Like, I thought it was just ignorance, but it turns out no, she's just a little shit. And maybe there is some character growth throughout the series, but then the end of the series really felt like it wasn't even a story about Lyra at all, which was so different from the beginning of the series. And really I think that Philip Pullman probably wrote this series just because he wanted to explore a lot of these concepts, especially like his anti-religious concepts that he has in there. And I'm not a fan of religion, but I'm not really sure that I agree with Philip Pullman's perspective of things either. And even if you're going to try and fit some of those messages into your story, like, I like the stories that I'm reading to have deeper meanings to them and like messages that the author's trying to get across, but I also want to have good characters and good plot and good like story structure. And this just was not it, unfortunately. Although I'm probably glad that I read this series just so I know. Then at number 10, I also have another 2 books from the same series. So we have A Lion Among Men and Out of Oz by Gregory Maguire. So these are the last 2 books in the Wicked series. Is that what the series is called? I don't know. I never know series names. But Wicked. So Wicked is like a retelling of the Wizard of Oz books, but primarily focusing on Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West. And then the series continues. In Son of a Witch, we follow her son. A Lion Among Men, of course, follows the Cowardly Lion. And then Out of Oz, we get Dorothy back, and we also get some other descendants of Elphabas, as well as like some quite significant characters from the original Oz series. But just actually, it's very hard to give you any more of a plot about these. 1, because it would spoil things, but 2, this is another series which I think really struggled with a lack of structure. There was so much waffling about things that didn't matter. The plot was so slow. At the same time, there's no character development, so it's not like that was the focus. Maybe this is another one where Gregory Maguire was trying to get across certain messages, but at this point I can't remember what any of those messages might have been. And as well, there's just so many bits in this book where he focuses on like really weird sex stuff that feels very unnecessary. And just, I think the main problem with these books, like actually the whole series including Wicked, which I did like Wicked, but I think this whole series really struggles with just like this very dense writing style that makes it hard to pick your way through the story. So this is unfortunate because I remembered really loving Wicked and Son of a Witch when I was younger, when I read them in like my 20s. But unfortunately, continuing the series didn't work out so well. Then at number 8, we have A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. So this is the sequel to A River Enchanted, which I read the previous year. To be honest, I didn't love A River Enchanted, but I just, for the completionist in me, I thought I would try continuing the series. I ended up DNFing A Fire Endless, so like, yay for me for actually managing a DNF. However, I probably should have known not to even pick it up. But I'll keep trying to learn how to do that. So basically in A River Enchanted, we follow this bard as he returns to the island he grew up on, where there are young girls going missing, and he gets involved with this previous love interest of his, trying to save these young girls and figure out what's going on. There's a magical element to things. There's also on the other half of the island this other clan that they've always been at war with, so there's some intrigue about what's going on with that. But really, these are romance stories, or like fantasy romance. We know that I don't really like fantasy romance, and just the focus on 2 relationships actually wasn't for me. Especially like Marriage of Convenience, no. So I did pick up A Fire Endless, and I think I didn't get very far into it before I could see that it was just going to be more of the same and just not for me at all. But I know a lot of people do love this one, and I actually think it's not that badly written. So maybe it shouldn't be as high on the list as it is, but I did DNF it, so for me it was probably worse. Then at number 7 we have For the Wolf by Hannah Witten. So this is another one that I should have DNF'd, but I think I finished it. I think I did. But honestly, I've mostly forgotten what happens, which is never good. Basically, we're in this world where the second daughter or something, the oldest daughter, whenever there's 2 daughters, there's some sister maths rule that a young girl will be sacrificed to the wolf in this forest, where the forest kind of has a life of its own. So this young girl gets sent out into the forest and meets this wolf guy. It's like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Or is it a Little Red Riding Hood retelling? I don't know. Either way, it's a bad retelling. When she meets this wolf man type guy, I just immediately assumed, because he's hundreds of years older and she's like a 16-year-old girl, that, you know, if anything, he'd be a father figure type thing. No, we decided to go with the romance. I'm never a fan of like big age gap romances, especially when like one is very experienced and like jaded from living his life and the other one is like knows nothing, very innocent. And there's definitely like questionable power dynamics going on in this relationship as well. The way the magic was described was so painful, just like so slow and didn't really make a lot of sense. And nothing was happening with the plot. There were some side characters who seemed quite likable, but just nothing happened. It was a waste of time. I should have DNF'd it. Then at number 6, I have A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This is another one where I should have known not to pick this up because this is like a prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree. And I mean, there were some things I liked about The Priory of the Orange Tree, but whereas so many people were like, it's so great to get this big standalone fantasy rather than it being a series, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree and I thought this should have been a trilogy because there was just too much heavy-handed world building right at the start, and then the pacing was all off in the middle, and the ending felt really rushed, even though some really epic things were happening. So I was disappointed in the writing of The Priory of the Orange Tree. So should I have picked up the prequel? I think I mainly did because I saw lots of people saying it was better than The Priory of the Orange Tree, and I thought maybe it is. And this is like a dragon-focused fantasy with some really cool magic and like politics and wars between different kingdoms. Like, there's a lot to love in it, but I also think the plots are quite flawed and just the whole structure of things. Maybe there's a good story in there, but the way that it's being told to you is just not, I don't know, I think it's really bad. And I really don't understand why so many people like these books. I just wonder, have they not read good fantasy? I don't know. But A Day of Fallen Night, like, these are really massive books and I just forced my way through it. So much of what happens in A Day of Fallen Night is just a rehash of the same things that happen in The Priory of the Orange Tree, because like in A Priory of the Orange Tree there's these bad dragons coming back. In A Day of Fallen Night there's these bad dragons coming back. Like, it's the same event just with different characters, and the characters aren't really different enough. I will admit there's some pretty bits of writing which maybe people liked, but again I just didn't feel like they had enough substance. Like, I don't mind beautiful writing, but it has to mean something. Anyway, A Day of Fallen Night was a waste of my time, but I did it to myself. Then at number 5 we have The Time Lizard's Archaeologist by Trish Hannafin. So I picked this one up because it is a New Zealand author and I do like to support and read New Zealand authors where I can, since I'm from New Zealand. And also I really like time travel, and I could see that this is a time travel story set in Auckland where I live. I thought that's super exciting, and the title, so weird, it's amazing. I loved it. The cover, cool. So I was really excited for this and really hopeful for this book, even though I'd heard nothing about it, of course. And I think there's like 2 reviews on Goodreads, so that's not a good sign, I guess. But you know, New Zealand authors often don't have many Goodreads reviews. So I picked it up, and actually at the beginning I was really loving it. We're following this psychologist who's having weird dreams and dealing with this trauma that he had when he was younger, and also thinking about the dreams that his clients have been telling him. And it was told in such a strange way where it was slipping between reality and dreams, which I could see in a different situation could be something that annoys me, but I actually was really enjoying the beginning. Then it kind of switches to this completely different time. Is it the future? Is it the past? Who knows? Where people are living underground, and there's also these other creatures that are living underground, and it just got really weird to the point where I no longer knew what was going on. And I think maybe at the time I read it I had a slightly better understanding than I do now, because now I've just forgotten what was even happening. But it just got to the point where it was so painful to read that even though the beginning had had so much promise and I could see that it was kind of gonna come all back together, I couldn't bring myself to keep pushing through it. So I ended up DNFing this one as well. Just such a shame. But I don't have as much hate for this one as maybe I do some of the other ones on the list, mainly because like I was always taking a risk with this one, and like I think this one was doing what it was trying to do. It's just that what it was trying to do isn't what I wanted. Then at number 4 I have the last 2 books in the Up and Under series by Shawnee Maguire. So this series had so much promise, and I think that's why it's as low as it is. So basically in the Middle Game book by Shawnee Maguire, there is this alchemist who writes these children books in order to get ideas into mainstream consciousness that will then allow her to do certain alchemy. And then the Up and Under series is supposed to be Shawnee Maguire like writing these stories under the name A. Deborah Baker, because that's the character from the book. Doesn't that sound cool? And I did really like the first book. Basically we follow these 2 young people, Avery and Zib. Avery is very straight-laced, follow the rules kind of boy, and Zib is more chaotic. they end up going over this wall and finding themselves in the Up and Under, where they have to follow the improbable road to find the impossible city, save the day, and also get themselves home. But unfortunately, the second book in the series was awful. I felt like it just had no point to it. It was very convoluted and waffly. And also, like, in these books, and in Middle Game, and in the Wayward Children books, Shauna Maguire likes to do like all these, I think in the Up and Under series she calls it digressions, like little inserts of like social commentary or just thoughts and ideas. And while I love that in Middle Game and some of the earlier Wayward Children books, I haven't been enjoying it in some of her later books. And I felt like in the second Up and Under book, all those digressions just seemed really pointless and like disconnected from the story. I think when it's done well, the digressions are still connected into the story. And in the second book, it didn't do that, but I didn't read the second book in 2023. I'm here to complain about the third and fourth book, even though, like, I should have just never picked them up. So basically, each one of these stories is focused on a different realm within the Up and Under, and each one of those is based on a different element. So the second book was water. The third book is called Into the Wind-Cracked Wilds, which is wind or air, and then the last book was called Under the Smoke-Strewn Sky, which was fire. But firstly, like, the way these books were split, I don't think quite fit with what was happening. I really think this book could have been made into a single book with 4 parts, and it could have been much better, and like just cut everything down. Maybe Shauna Maguire is another one who's like getting in trouble from not being edited enough these days. But I did think the third book actually had a lot of potential, and maybe it was my second favorite in the series, but still a massive disappointment because there was so much more potential. I still think this series had amazing potential and could be rewritten to be really amazing, but it just wasn't. So much of it is just pointless. A lot of the social commentary, either I would agree with it, but it would be written in such a weird way that I was like, what? Or like there were some things where she was saying things and I just don't agree. And I didn't feel like she was even like making a good argument for what she was trying to say. And I thought the final ending was just so lackluster and disappointing. Just really disappointing. I don't know what else to say about it. Disappointing. Then at number 3 we have Singularity by Charlotte Grimshaw. Unfortunately, another New Zealand author on the list. This is one I just picked up randomly at a free little library, mainly because I could see it was a short story anthology with like interconnected stories, and I thought the concept of singularity is kind of interesting, but that's not really what the stories are about. What are the stories about? Well, I don't think the author even knew. Sometimes I felt like maybe she was almost making a point, but the stories were always so lacking in focus and, to be honest, just badly written. Maybe it's because these stories are more kind of literary and I'm like a fantasy sci-fi girl, but I don't think that was it. I think they were just badly written. I did try to look at other reviews of this, but this is another one where there's almost no reviews, but I did see some other negative ones, so I'm not the only one who felt this way. We're basically following a bunch of different people in New Zealand that are interconnected, and they do some stuff, they have some terrible lives, some terrible things happen, sometimes there's a message, but I got to maybe the 6th story or something, and I just couldn't be bothered. I just thought this is way too much effort, and I don't care. Painful, and I don't want to do it, so I didn't. Then at number 2 we have 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So this is like a classic magical realism story. In fact, after I've read some magical realism books, I saw a lot of people saying, you know, this is the first book of magical realism, you should read it if you love magical realism. And so I picked it up, and there were parts that were interesting. It is told in a way where it is kind of hard to follow because like we're following different generations of this family and they all have very similar names, and sometimes they almost seem like they're the same person even though they're a different person. It feels like a lot of the time we're just telling the same story over and over again. But also, this is another one I DNF'd, and I DNF'd it just because there was too much talk about sex with teenage girls, like grown men having sex with teenage girls and like making out like that was okay, and like there didn't seem to be any like meaningful point to it, and just like mostly the magical realism weirdness of it either wasn't enough for me to be interested in it or was just like dumb. I don't know. I know that this is a classic and so many people say it's great, but I kind of think maybe it's just a product of its time. Let's keep it in the past and move on. I know some people will say like if you're going to read magical realism, you should read the books that are at its roots and like appreciate the cultures that it came from. but if the cultures it came from are gonna be heavily influenced by gross old men, no thanks. Okay, and then lastly, in 2023, I continued and completed the Wheel of Time books by Robert Jordan, and Brandon Sanderson finished off the last ones. To be honest, the last ones weren't so bad. They don't make it onto this list. But I did read Path of Daggers and The Gathering Storm, and those were the books. I forget what numbers they are. I think 7 and maybe 8, and I think 8 is where I DNF'd the series, kind of. I basically went online. Halfway through book number 8, I went online, I read all the plot summaries up to like book 11, and then I went back to reading the physical books. And I know fans of the Wheel of Time will say that I missed out on so much. And I think maybe the only thing I feel like I missed out on was Matt and Tuon's relationship. Other than that, I don't really believe I missed out on anything. Like, the pacing of the books in what everyone calls the slog is so glacial, and so much of what is happening is not stuff that I'm interested in, not stuff that's significantly driving the plot forward. And I just, like, if I had to slog through the slog rather than reading the plot summaries, I don't think I would have made it. So I'm happy with the way I did do it. And I will say, we're currently watching the Wheel of Time show. We're about halfway through season 2. And even though there's a lot of things that they've changed in the TV show that I'm not a fan of, I still think the general structure of the story is much better in the TV show, and I'm enjoying consuming it that way. Like, I'm glad I've read the books and the plot summaries so that I have the bigger context of the world, and I know like where the TV show isn't quite as good. But I'm also enjoying the TV show a lot more than I ever enjoyed the books. Again, Wheel of Time fans will 100% disagree with that, but that's okay. So let me know if you've read any of the books that I've talked about today. I would love to know if you love them. What did you love about them? Or otherwise, let's commiserate about terrible books down in the comments. And do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.